There's this incredible moment in the great Thomas Hardy novel Jude the Obscure, where a child suicides and takes some other children with him because he feels he's a burden to his parents. And in his suicide note, he writes, "Because we are too many, M-E-N-N-Y." Now that's a work of literature, that's a work of the imagination, but here were these kids in the desert, you know, so poignantly misspelling the last sort of statement to the world. But what got me was taking responsibility for it. You know, when no one else had taken responsibility for these kids. This last act of really just a big child was to take responsibility. And that's what children do. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but my sense is if you can't bear to think that the adult world around you, or the world that's tasked with looking after you, if they can't do it, I mean, you can't bear to think that they can't do it, so you take that responsibility on yourself. And it seemed to me, when I was, like probably many of you, transfixed by the television coverage of the apology to the stolen generations a couple of weeks ago, it seemed to me that what I was seeing in the Aboriginal people who were in Parliament House listening to the Prime Minister's address was that someone was finally saying to these children that it wasn't their fault. So, anyway, I'm going to read from the book now. I'm just going to read a section which is actually partly tied to Adelaide. Just a little bit of background. The character that we're with is Sonia. She's 61. She's a Danish immigrant, recently widowed, struggling with the loneliness of her new life. And I think that's all I'll say. And I will close with this reading. Sonia swallows her sleeping tablet and puts the glass in the dishwasher. 40 years ago, and everything promised had come to be. Only Peter had been dead for just over a year now. She had neglected to ask for time. Time had been the last thing on her mind. She has 20 minutes before the pill will take effect. She reaches into the cupboard below the sink and takes out a little packet and tears it open and drops the detergent tablet into its place in the door of the dishwasher. And not everything had come to be, she remembers. Peter had never made the bookshelves for Yvonne and Godfrey, but she does not want to think of that. The sound of the dishwasher soothes her. Television light flickers in the lounge room. Sonia picks up the remote from the coffee table and moves to switch it off, but she sees something on the screen that stops her. There are police cars and ambulances, and people's unchoreographed movements tell her that this is real life. For the first time that day, she is outside herself, searching amongst the vehicles and flashing lights and the people with grave, withholding faces. It's some kind of open space that is revealed to her, a place with grass, a sports oval perhaps. There are bodies on stretchers under white sheets, and suddenly she notices how small these white shapes are, and she lowers herself onto the lounge with both hands to her face. "Oh," she exhales, the first word she has spoken out loud that day, realising that the bodies are those of children. "Don't show this," she says sharply, 4 words spoken now, to the pitiless camera as it records its tally, but she cannot look away. By the time she finds the volume, the vision has moved to a suburban street, an untended garden, a roller door, the glimpse of a blue 4-wheel drive. And then there's an advertisement. She switches off the TV, and then one lamp and another. She has always liked these dark, silent rounds, this time of walking slowly from room to room, checking windows for air and security, bringing together the heavy doors onto the patio. She was always the last to check on the children, the last one to bed. But it's different now, and not just because the house is empty and she is alone. In 15 minutes, the sleeping pill will take it all away. It won't be like falling asleep when the mind slowly loses its hold on thoughts and closes on itself. The sleeping pill is a black cancellation of everything. She is there, and then she is not. As she climbs the stairs, she wonders if this is what death is like. Perhaps, if death is merciful. She thinks of what she has just seen on TV and how she doesn't fully understand it yet and can't yet believe it, but that if it is true that some children have gone, how she hopes that they have gone like this. In the bathroom, she turns on the tap and squeezes out toothpaste and thinks of the summer she was pregnant with Carl, pregnant for the first time, heavily pregnant, and the 3 Beaumont children went missing. She and Peter had been in Australia for 3 years, but she was living still in her own small land, within the walls of her house, under the protectorate of her marriage. But Peter was changing. He was going to be an Australian, he said. He was home. She had tried, but she hadn't yet found this home that Peter talked about. Jane and Anna and Grant Beaumont vanished from a beach in Adelaide on Australia Day, 1966. They were 9 and 7 and 4. It was a hot day, the children caught a bus, they had money, people saw them at play. How could children just vanish? Peter was away all day. All day the baby kicked at her, and still the children didn't appear. She listened to the radio and she began to watch the news on TV. In order to read about the children, she walked slowly to the shops each morning to buy a newspaper. As she handed her money to the woman behind the counter, she found she wanted to speak, although she hadn't spoken to the woman before. "Isn't it terrible about the children?" she said. "Shocking," said the woman, shaking her head. "Imagine if you were the parents." "Imagine," she said, holding out her hand for the change. Soon there would be a new currency. "When's your Little due?" asked the woman. "In 6 weeks," said Sonia. "Is it your first?" Sonia nodded. "Thought so. You're carrying high. It's usually like that." "Oh," said Sonia. "You take care of yourself now. It's going to be a hot one." She walked home using the newspaper to shield her eyes from the sun. Still the children had not been found. On the roads that she walked there were dense bush blocks with "for sale" signs. Other blocks had already been cleared, and on some, building had begun. This was where her child would grow, where she would try to keep him safe. "Imagine if you were the parents." The words came back to her like an instruction. She could do nothing about the missing children. She was helpless, like the children's parents, but she could be on the parents' side. She could try to imagine what they were living through. She might not imagine well. There were her own fears and the limits of her own mind, but she could try. She couldn't pray because she didn't believe. Imagining was all she could do. Outside her house she stopped to check the letterbox. She saw a woman further down the street getting out of her car, and she lingered, slowly opening her mail until the call came. "Another hot day?" "Yes," said Sonia, walking to the edge of her driveway. Between the two women was an area of bush. Banksia flowers stood on trees like strange fat candles. "I wondered who lived in this house," the woman said, shading her eyes with her hand. "They've nearly finished ours. We'll be moving in pretty soon." The woman and Sonia exchanged names and the names of their husbands. The woman told her that she had 2 children. "Isn't it awful about the Beaumont children?" said Sonia, realising that this was why she had waited. "Awful. Makes you wonder," said Susan. "Imagine if you were the parents," Sonia repeated the words. "I can't bear to think about it," said Susan, shaking her head. Sonia looked at the woman's white eyeshadow and the freckles above her top lip. "But you must," she wanted to implore, "you must not leave them alone." As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, a variation on the words came into her head. "Imagine if you were the children." She lay down on the bed and switched on the fan and placed her hands on her stomach. She should do this too, she thought. Imagine the children, try to be with them, wherever they were, whatever they might be suffering. But imagining for the children was harder still, because she couldn't remember, not really, what it was like to be a 4 or 7 or 9-year-old, to live inside a small body. and she wondered if taking her imagination to a place where harm was done to the children was, in a sense, to harm them also. It was as if only a clear imagination, or no imagination at all, might hold the children aloft. She thought of the boy, for it was a boy, she was sure of that, who kicked inside her. So many times she had imagined lifting and holding and comforting him. She understood the vigilance and labour that this would require, but she saw now that there would be more than this, that in order to make the world safe for him, she would also have to make her own mind safe, that she could no longer stray into its darkness for fear of leading him there too. The fan poured warm air along her body, her feet throbbed. As she thought about the Beaumont children, she remembered a story from her childhood and how that story had made her feel. A child's sadness, and yet not at all that different from what she was feeling now. She had been about 10 years old when their teacher told the class the story of the children of Leah. The class knew about the old women at Odense Hospital who had cared for Hans Christian Andersen, and how he had listened to their folk tales, and how from these tales he had imagined his own stories, as the children should imagine theirs. The long face of Hans Christian Andersen gazed down on them from the portrait on the wall, and sometimes it seemed he was crying. Did you know that in Ireland, if someone kills a swan, the punishment is death? The teacher asked. The children shook their heads slowly. Sonia looked out the bedroom window at the hot blue sky. The baby kicked again. She didn't know how much of the story she could remember. In Ireland, there was a king whose name was Leah. Leah had a daughter, Fionnuala, and 3 small sons. When the king's wife died, he married her sister so that life could go on. The king's new wife was jealous of his love for the children, and one day she invited them to ride in her chariot. They rode all day through the forest until the horses stopped beside a lake. Their stepmother told the children that they must bathe after their long journey, but as the children swam, she struck the water with a magic rod. The children screamed in fear, but soon they saw that it was not with hands and arms that they threshed against the water, but with white feathered wings, and then they saw that they were not children anymore, but swans. The children wept. "You will be swans for 900 years," their aunt called out to them. "Only when the first bells of Christianity are heard throughout the land will you be free." Fionnuala folded her wings over her brothers as night came down on the Lake of Oaks. After 300 years had passed, the swans flew to the sea that lay between Scotland and Ireland, and they made a home there upon the Rock of Seals. The winter rose up black and cruel, ice tore their feathers and salt ate their wounds, and in their pain they almost forgot that they were children, the children of Leah, with children's hope. But they were cursed to endure. After another 300 years they were exiled to the Inish Glora, where storms parted them, and only by singing did they find each other again. One day, 900 years after they had been led to the lake's edge, the children rose up from the Atlantic waters and flew to the land of their father. But there was no kingdom there anymore, and their hearts were so heavy that they could no longer fly. They came down to land in a calm bay, and it was there that they first heard the ringing of a bell. It was such a lovely sound, a sound made by the movement of a human hand, that they sang out in reply. High up in his church on the land, the bell ringer heard the voices of children and followed the sound to the bay. "Are you the children of Leah?" he said to the 4 white swans. "We are," said the children, dipping their long necks. "We are the children of Leah." The bell ringer slipped a silver chain around their necks and led them onto the land. Soon the children believed they would be free. One day a young king arrived at the church and ordered the bell ringer to give him the birds with the voices of children. He had promised his wife he would bring her this prize. "They are under my protection," the bell ringer said. "You cannot have them for your sport." The king flew into a rage and rushed towards them. But no sooner had he grasped the chain around their necks Then the coats of the swans fell to the ground, and in place of them shivered a pale, withered old woman and 3 withered old men. The children of Leah cried out one last time and died. It had all been inside her, Sonia thought, the whole story, folded up tight like origami. She wondered about the other children who had listened to the story in the schoolroom that day, whether it had become part of them too. Did she care so much for the fate of the Beaumont children because this story already existed within her? She would heave her belly off the bed and go downstairs and feed herself and her baby. She wanted to eat forever. Soon the news would be on the radio and she would hear about the search for the children. She didn't think they'd be found. She realised this as her feet touched the floor. Perhaps she had known it all along, and this was what the children of Leah had taught her. Stories about children did not always have a happy end, and the years might pass and the world might move on, but the loss would never be recovered. Sonia rubs Nivea into her elbows. It is only minutes now before the sleeping pill will work. She had her baby, and he was a boy, as she knew. And 4 years later, there was another. It was as she had wanted. The female line had stopped at her. She had kept her children safe. She had tried not to enter the dark in her mind. But Carl had been an anxious child, his blue eyes watching her as if she might merely be pretending to be his mother. And Gabriel, the easy child, she's not sure that Gabriel is easy now, but they are far away. Sometimes she hardly feels like their mother anymore. In the bedroom she can see by the moon. She will need only a sheet, and she pulls the blanket to the end of the bed. The Beaumont children had never been found. Imagine if you were the parents. But Sonia had found something. She had cared about the fate of 3 children, children of Australia, and on the radio and television and in newspapers and talk, she had found home. She pushes the window open and thinks of Peter. The distance between her and nothing is closing. It's the peaceful part of the day, but she has seen dead children under white sheets. She will set the alarm so that she can hear the news when she wakes. Thank you.